Octaves are the most important double stop on the violin, and today you're going to learn how to master them. Octaves are the most important double stop on the violin because they establish the proper hand frame, the spacing between the first finger and the fourth finger, at every position along the violin. As we go higher up the fingerboard, the hand frame gets smaller and smaller. Having this framework is the foundation of all good intonation. Not only are octaves the most important double stop, but it's the double stop that I would work on first because it establishes the framework for the other double stops. There are two main difficulties when working on octaves, and I would suggest working on them separately in order to expedite the process of mastering them. The first difficulty is shifting. When we play octaves, almost every transition involves a shift. We isolate the shifts by only playing the bottom note. I would suggest making the shifts very, very slow so that you can use your ear to guide you and make sure that you never miss one of these shifts. If you haven't already checked out my videos on shifting where we talk about keys to success such as release and timing, I might go and check those out in order to help you with your octaves. After mastering this step, I would place both fingers down but only voice the bottom note. Finally, we play both notes, but we keep our attention mostly on the bottom note. Now that you understand the way to progress your practicing of the shifts, I also want to highlight a couple of difficult shifting transitions that might be confusing. First of all, this shift. With all shifts, it's important to have a plan for how you're getting from point A to point B. Usually that involves a ghost note. This shift involves one too, but it's a little unique in that you have to hop the first finger over to the D string before using it as a ghost. Be sure you totally release the pressure from the first finger before hopping, and only return the pressure when your ear tells you you've arrived. A similar process would be used if the higher chord was an open A string with the third finger. The other shift I want to highlight is this one. When octaves get higher on the fingerboard, it eventually becomes useful to transition to fingering them with a 1 and a 3. When to transition will depend on your hand. I like to keep my transition point relatively consistent when I'm doing scales, and sometimes I will also force myself to stick to 1 and 4 in order to solidify my hand frame. When executing this shift, the first finger is again the guiding finger. Immediately release the fourth finger when you start the shift, and get into the proper hand frame with the third finger as you shift. The process is the same on the way down, but in reverse. The second difficulty of octaves is spacing. The distance between the first and fourth finger has to be accurate, and as we move up the fingerboard, the spacing gets incrementally smaller. Now, the best way to work on the spacing in between the first and fourth fingers is to do the same stage progression that we do with all of our double stops. I covered this in the intro video to the Mastering Double Stops series, but I'll also go over them briefly here. Step 1 is playing the notes separately and getting them completely in tune before playing them together. The rule of thumb for the order of operations in which we place our fingers down is that we want to place the lower number finger first, not the lowest pitch, the lower number finger. The rule is we never want to leave a note before we love the way that it sounds, so the intonation should be perfect. The more careful you are with the separate notes, the less work you'll have to put in when you put the notes together. I'd also recommend doing all of your double stops with a drone. It's one of those things that you can just turn it on and it will just make you better without having to think about it. I've made videos of beautiful sounding drones, so it should be an enjoyable thing to add to your practice. Stage 2 is grabbing the second note without playing it individually. On this one, you can get gradually closer and closer to the next stage, which is playing them exactly at the same time. As with all of the double stops, I do like to make the shifts really quite obvious until we've advanced a little bit further in the stages. What's more important than getting the tempo up or even training the left hand initially is training your ear to hear it all accurately. After that, stage 4 is to transition underneath a slur. This This is one of my favorite stages. It forces you to really release and to make the transition quickly and smoothly. The next stage is eighth notes. After that, sky's the limit. It can go into triplets, it can go into 16th notes. Basically, you just want to continue stretching yourself to do faster speeds that you can still do accurately. Now that we've tackled both difficulties of shifting and spacing in our octaves, it's time to move to the final trick that will really unlock your octaves for good. Here's the idea. 90% of your arm weight and your attention should go to the bottom note. You should really think of the upper note as basically an overtone. In order to drive this point home, check out this clip of Heifetz playing octaves. Notice anything interesting about it? Heifetz follows this rule to the point that sometimes he doesn't even play the upper note for several chords in a row. And to be honest, it's pretty difficult for the average ear to hear that those notes are missing. Now, mastering octaves is important and it establishes the framework for the rest of the double stops. But this next double stop is even more versatile, and it forces us to master every main finger pattern on the violin. And I would say that mastering those finger patterns is the biggest key to fantastic intonation. Check it out here.